economist Eliana Santanatoglia. And now I get to start reading because there's a lot of information here. Ms. Santanatoglia holds a PhD, so I would call her doctor in my country, in philosophy of law from the Law School of the University of Buenos Aires, an MSc in philosophy of social sciences from the London School of Economics and Political Science, and an MA in economics and political science from, what is that? ESEADE. Thank you. As well as being a lawyer with a degree from the University of Buenos Aires Law School. Goodness. At the UBA Law School, Eliana is a regular adjunct professor of legal theory, deputy director of the Department of Philosophy of Law. She is also co-founder and executive director of the David Hume Institute Foundation, Center for Research in Normative and Institutional Evolution. She currently serves as director of global affairs of the Honorable National Senate of Argentina. She has a long and just to be clear, I edited this down. She has a long and stellar career in both the private and public sectors, served as advisor to the Undersecretary of Government, Ministry of Government of the City of Buenos Aires, coordinating the virtual school of the Undersecretary of Government and Attorney General of the City of Buenos Aires. Her main areas of research are legal theory, constitutional law, moral and political philosophy, the philosophy of social sciences, and the interrelations between these disciplines. She's published numerous papers in academic journals and book chapters and books. She has lectured and participated in colloquia in all of these areas of thought in Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, Guatemala, Chile, the United States, and England, and I probably missed some. Today's talk, the title of which is The Evolution of Rules and Institutions. In this talk, she will address the questions, what are rules and institutions? How do they appear, develop, or disappear? Are they result of creation of an individual or a group? Are they the result of a slow trial and error process? Is it biological, cultural, individual? To answer all of this and more, Ms. Santanatoglia will propose an account of rules and institutions not as a deliberate creation of an individual or group, but rather the unintended, gradual, and cumulative result of the interrelations between individuals over time. Hand in hand with classical authors of new evolutionary theories, she will address the relation between individuals and their institutional contexts. Biological, cultural, and individual evolution will be considered, and examples will be discussed. I am so looking forward to this talk. Ms. Santanatoglia, por favor.
I have to move this. I'm not so tall, you know. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to be here today, presenting my ideas on these topics as a member. Sorry, I will put this here. As a member, also, I'm very happy to share these ideas because some other members and friends here were knowing that I have been working on a book about this, so it's a good opportunity to share this. As you may know, I will put it here. I have just published this book, that is an evolutionary account of law. This is the result of a first master degree dissertation at the London School of Economics that then turned into a PhD dissertation at the University of Buenos Aires, and then it was translated and published as a book in English. So the main ideas that I've been exposing today is in this book. This book is very long, so there are 300 pages, and I will not be able to expose all the details of it, but my idea is to present the main ideas, so then we can discuss them and share, and you will tell me what do you think about them. First, this is like the main plan of the talk, I will be trying to think about rules, not only social and moral rules, but also legal rules and institutions, like political institutions. And we are asking, today, if these rules and institutions are the product of a conscious and deliberate creation by a person, by a legislator, or a group of people, or are the outcome of a long-lasting evolutionary process of trial and error, like a social process or a biological process, etc. So this is the main question. I will be proposing this evolutionary vision, evolutionary account of the emergence of the legal order and the political institutions, and I will take into account for this a discussion between what we can call constructivism, that is the opposite vision, the idea that legal orders, political institutions are based on a conscious creation by a group of people, and I will propose this evolutionary account by thinking this as a ground process, as this process by, as I said, a trial and error of interaction between individuals that allows the emergence of these regularities and these rules, these institutions. And I put in there certain ideas that I will develop afterwards. That is, we are talking about biological evolutionary process, we are talking about a cultural evolutionary process, or we're talking about a co-evolutionary, like the relation between the culture and the biology. How individuals learn in this context, and maybe we can think law, we can think in political institutions as the outcome of these three engines of evolution: biological, social, and individual. So this is like the main plan, and of course I will try, if I have time, to give some examples of the effect or the consequences of these ideas in their real life, so as we can then discuss the pros and cons of having this vision in comparison with other visions of law and political institutions. Well, first, this is a kind of how these spontaneous orders, how these emergent orders can be studied, and I present my first ideas. First, as I said before, the evolutionary vision of law, the evolutionary vision of any social order is constructed, is like in contrast with this other vision, the constructivist vision, that think that legal orders, political orders, social orders are the conscious creation, the conscious elaboration of a person or a group of people in one moment, historically established, and it is as a conscious creation. It can also be changed by design, it can also be changed for the voluntary of a group of people, and this vision of social orders implies that there's a creator, there's a legislator or group of legislators. We always think that orders are made by the volunteer of a group of individuals. In contrast with this vision, we have the idea of social orders, legal orders, political orders are the outcome of an emergent process, of a bottom-up process, not a top-down process, and that they are shaped by human interactions, by repeated individual interactions through time. As I said before, there are certain theories and schools that propose that this process is purely biological, others think that they are purely cultural, and others thought that there is the interaction of this like cultural and biological evolutionary process that allows the evolution, the emergence of these rules. But first, I will tell you a little about how the work is structured, how the book is structured. The book is structured in three parts. The first one is about like classical evolution. This is a name I put, but for me it's a classical evolutionism. Classical evolutionism, I name what is the first authors that think in those terms. This is not something new, you know. These ideas are not like 21st century, there are 18th century ideas that are represented by authors such as David Hume, Adam Smith, Adam Ferguson, all the Scottish Enlightenment. They were the first that presented the idea that like institutions, rules, social rules, moral rules, and legal rules are the product of long-lasting trial and error social process. You know, that they are not the product of a contract. Do you remember the contractualists? Well, they are not in that side of the discussion. They thought that they are the product of again, a learning social process. So the first one, we will see some of the ideas now. Then there are other authors in the 20th century, like Friedrich Hayek, that followed those ideas and put it in the discussion of the 20th century and wrote about, for example, legal theory from an evolutionary point of view, but in the terms of the 20th century. There are other authors that we were discussing before with Elena Catena, like Douglas North. There is a Nobel Prize that talk about institutions, for example, informal and formal institutions. They are also influenced by these authors of the 18th century. We'll see some now. The second part of the book is about not this classical evolutionism, but current evolutionary theories in social sciences. You know, something that happened the last 40 years, 50 years maybe now, is that there was like a biological turn in social sciences. There are certain authors, like, for example, Dawkins, with Selfish Gene, and other authors started to talk about how social institutions, again, legal, political, moral institutions could emerge, and they started to talk in terms of biological terms. Some theories started to explain these institutions as, again, the sophisticated strategies for survival, you know, sophisticated strategies that individuals develop for biological survival, for biological fit. Other theories that are not biological, they are cultural evolutionists in the last years. They started to explain, again, rules and institutions as social strategies, but they started to talk in biological terms, like metaphors, you know. And there are a lot of theories nowadays that talk about adaptation, mutation, and all that vocabulary, even if they are talking about cultural evolution. And then there are a third group of people that talk about the co-evolution, the vision of that biological evolution and cultural evolution together can explain, for example, human behavior, human regularities. Not one or the other, but both. So this is the second part of the book. The third part of the book is about how I took ideas from the classical evolutionism and the current evolutionism to apply to law, and how can we explain law from this point of view, taking into account ideas from all these theories. The current evolutionary theories have like a much more precision than the old ones. The old ones were the first that introduced this idea. So a lot of people are saying, okay, but Hume said that, like in the 18th century. Yes, of course. But nowadays we have much more developed models to explain the interactions of individuals. We have neurosciences to understand how our brain works, and a lot of different elements that science come into the table to understand these ideas more deeply and more precisely. So I try to apply all that with also another methodological discussions that I will not say much about this today, but I apply all that to law, and I propose an evolutionary account of law in those terms. So we'll see a little about all that. First, the pioneers, the classical evolutionism and the Scottish school, as I said. To start with some content, because there was all a presentation till now. I will take only some ideas of each theory, so as we can then connect all of them. Scottish Enlightenment started to talk about human nature. Here it says human condition, but it's more human nature. And they talk about some kind of one objective condition of human nature, one condition that it has to be with their context, that is scarcity. Scarcity for them is reality. the individuals have unlimited needs and they have scarce resources. So that is the situation men found on Earth, you know. And then they talk about human nature in terms of certain subjective characteristics and some, and this characteristic could be like more positive or more negative. Like in a way, they said individuals are self-interest. There are a lot of authors that says that. The idea of self-interest in the Scottish Enlightenment is not like pure, mean egoism. It's like saying that each individual have their own motor, their whole motive for behavior, and that their own interest could be not only themselves, their neighborhood, their communities, you know. But generally, they explain very well cooperation in small groups. Adam Smith is the first that could explain cooperation in bigger societies, in bigger groups. But again, they're talking about that the motor of the behavior is inside individuals. They are not external. They are not external, to the interest of individual. Then they talk about limited generosity. Each of us are generous in a way, but are not infinite generous. So we are more devoted to our friends, to our family, to our community than for all the human race. But then they talk about something that is not so typical of that moment. That is, here it says empathy, but in fact the term they use is sympathy. And they talk about sympathy as one of the main characteristics of human nature. The capacity to be able to put in other shoes, to understand feelings, to connect in a more sensitive way, and to understand how the other behave, because I think, what could I do in that position? What could I do, or what would I do if I have the same situation as the other person? And we start to like to see the others from our own perspective, and this is mutual, a reciprocal game. So they started to think about individuals that are self-interest, limited generosity, but they have also this capacity to be sympathetic with others. The last characteristic that I put there, that is bounded rationality, is more introduced in this 20th century by authors like Hayek and other authors that started to think about how individuals take decisions, but not with complete information and with complete rationality. They think about that human nature is not perfect, and we take decisions every day, but with limited knowledge and with limited time. This is a long-lasting discussion in the 20th century and in the 21st century. If we are rational, we are not rational. But if we are not completely rational, as certain theories, as like the rational choice theory says, we are not being able to agree with that theory. It's not that we are saying that we are completely rational. No, we are rational, but perhaps in a more limited way, and in a way that is connected with our context. And there's authors that talk about egological or ecological rationality. That it's not, it hasn't to be with ecology, but with the idea that individuals take decisions in a context, in a particular context. So these are the characteristics that we're taking into account as human nature. And then here is just an example. You know that I have a foundation as David Hume Institute Foundation, so I put an example by David Hume. David Hume is one of the first that explain how, for example, what he calls the three universal principles of justice could emerge. He established that, for example, in his idea of the state of nature, they talk about the state of nature, but again, we change from the state of nature to the civil community, not by contract, by a process of learning. And what he's talking about is that in the state of nature, we have this characteristic like insecurity in our possessions. There's no division of labor, so each of us has to do everything, to look for food, for a house, for water, for everything. And then there's also limited energy. We have to sleep one moment, we have to eat. We are not infinite energy, etc. So these are the characteristics of the individuals in the state of nature. So there's a pressure, like external pressure, there is a scarcity, and there's, well, here it says limited empathy, but it's limited generosity in particular, that creates certain social instability. So individuals started to see if they start to respect certain rules, certain principles, they start to live better in a way. They start to coordinate more. For example, the first thing that Hume talks about is like, well, let's cooperate with each other. So when you go to grab for food, I take care of your kids, for example. Or when you're sleeping, I'm like a sentinel. I'm looking for our security. And when I sleep, you look for me. So that the first ideas of minimal cooperation started to see as a good idea for a better life for all the members of that community. Well, in that way, Hume explains, for example, that to survive and to have a better life, they started to see that there are certain principles, for example, the respect of the stability of possession, that is that each individual can have their own goods and without being interfered by others, what we call then private property or something like that. The transfer by consent, the idea that the interchange of or the buy and sells are by consent. I cannot take from others, or others cannot take from me without my consent. That then this is what we call contracts in a way, and the performance of promises, that is the respect for contracts, and the idea that the contracts is a law between in the individuals that sign them. There are what he calls the three universal principles of justice. For him, these principles did not appear by, again, the creation of a person, of a group of people, one day signing a contract. They appear slowly by trial and error, and they prove to be efficient in time to coordinate individuals, to allow them to live better and to have a more prosperous community. So these are an example of cultural evolutionist explanation of, for example, how can justice principles could emerge. This is the first one, 18th century. So then we can have this idea of Adam Ferguson. Adam Ferguson is another Scottish Enlightenment author, and he devoted one of his books on political institutions, or what we can call evolutionary visions of political institutions. And he says something that all the evolutionary authors then repeat. That is the idea that institutions are the result of human action, but not of human design. So we need individuals to have institutions. We need interactions of individuals to have institutions, of course. But we don't need design. We don't need conscious creation to have them. So the idea, what he explains, is that sometimes institutions are born in specific circumstances. For example, I have conflict with my neighborhood. I have to deal with, I don't know, we have a tree in the middle of the two properties of my neighbor and mine, and they have fruits, and how we can divide those fruits. It's just in the middle of those. Well, we can we can think about an idea of, well, one year you have the fruits, the other year the other have the fruits, or we can take all the fruits and divide it by two, or we can establish the principle that the person that works on the tree has the fruits of the tree. We can try different solutions. What Ferguson speaks is about that certain principles, certain solutions that were created or that appeared for certain particular situations, then prove efficient during time for other situations. How? By imitation, for example. Well, something similar to my neighbor happens to me, well, I can copy that solution for my case. Or I can copy with certain change. Or if we think about more complex society, we can think on judges and the precedents, that, well, we have a solution given by a previous case, now I take the solution for this new case, etc. So again, Ferguson says something like, the first person that says, I will give orders, and other people follow him or her, and they were not thinking that they were creating monarchy, on that the first person that established a rule to divide fruits in between neighbors, they don't think that they were creating private property. They think that they are giving solutions to a specific situation, and then those solutions prove efficient for other situations during time. So now here I introduce some ideas of Friedrich Hayek's 20th century evolutionary vision of law, and he says something like, for example, law precedes legislation, okay? We think that, of course, law is, in a way, produced by legislation. We have, in Argentina, we have a lot of written rules, for example. We have civil codes and commercial codes and penal codes, and we have a lot of, but that is not all the law that exists. That the idea that law is the product of certain rules that are, in a way, respected. That, that there's a term that is more like 20th century, that is law-like behavior. Sometimes we behave as if it were a law, even if we don't know the law in positive ways. We didn't read the code, but most of us know that certain things are prohibited or legally permitted, even if we have never read a code. So the idea that the law is created by certain different kind of rules, some are more abstract, some are more positive, etc. Well, he gives a classification. I will not, then we can discuss this. But the idea is that the legal order is the product of the interactions of a lot of individuals, each of us having limited knowledge. Each of us has knowledge, but of a part of that order, we create expectations about the actions of other people, and then we start to let certain regularities emerge, as I said before, certain rules, certain principles, certain institutional solutions. So legislation, it's just the iceberg. I don't know, it's like the part of the iceberg. Well, second part, it's like, I will take from these very, very little ideas, but just to show you something about it, it's the new evolutionary theories. And as I said before, some of them are more based on biological evolution. Some, for example, evolutionary psychology explains a lot about how we have the rules we have, the institutions we have, based on biological evolution, like evolutionary fit, evolutionary survival. There are other theories that are more cultural evolutionist, like evolutionary game theory. If you're interested in game theory, then we can discuss. It's very interesting. And then there are these theories that think about co-evolution. Sorry, again. Well, I will not talk about all this because it's a lot of details, but just to say, evolutionary psychology, for example, provide us with the idea that our brains, all our brains, are conformed by the Stone Age, and our Stone Age brains are trying to resolve problems of the 21st century. So we have something in common, What we have in common? That our brains do not born blank. We have certain mechanisms in our brains that are previous to our cultural learning. And those mechanisms could help us to understand, for example, this is very common in all the talks nowadays, is little babies, after the first month that they could not see very well, they can recognize faces. And that is not something that they learn in terms of cultural learning. There's something that their brains are able to do. And they recognize first, of course, their mothers or fathers and the people near them, and then other people. And you know that you can have much more ability to recognize faces in the first months of your life than much when you are an adult, because there are synapses, they create like synapses in their brains for the faces they recognize more, and then that ability starts to decline in a way when we are much older. But just to say this is, we have that in common, so we also have in common that in our communities we started to introduce certain rules that allow us to be able to have more biological fit, to survive, or to have more descendants. It's very hot here, sorry, but I'm like... So the evolutionary psychology can introduce these ideas, can help us to understand how certain rules could be based on biological survival. It could be based in biological evolution. Oh, thank you. Second, this is like the evolutionary game theory ideas. Again, I will not explain all of this. This is very technical, but just to say that the people that do evolutionary game theory think about models in which they can show us how the repeated interactions over time of people allow them to create strategies to interact with each other, and certain strategies are proven to be more successful than others. And then individuals, by imitation and by, in a way, thinking to get better, try to imitate those strategies that have more results. For example, if in certain communities in which certain cooperation or certain justice rules are incorporated, those communities have more prosperity, have more peace, and are more cooperative than others that do not incorporate those kind of principles or ideas. So if then we would like to talk about this, I can talk a little about the models. There are certain models that I think that apply very well to law and how the individuals are connected to each other and how these legal rules can evolve in those models. But I took certain ideas from these kind of theories. Then the one that I talked before, the idea of co-emergence, the co-evolution, is that there are certain authors that talk about how the biological heritage, like the genotype in a certain, you know what is a genotype? That is our like biological inheritance from our parents, can work differently in different cultural contexts. So we can have a very, for example, this is an example from the authors, we can have a very genetically talented boy or girl, because both parents are musicians and very talented musicians, but if that person could not take any time in their life a class of music, most probably they don't develop that talent. And other persons that do not have that heritage but have a lot of incentive from the cultural context, probably they will develop that talent. That is for the Orquesta de los Barrios also a good idea of how talent could be genetically, but also culturally developed or culturally incentivized. So, we have these ideas that the co-evolutionary engine works. So, I will not talk about this a lot. This is a couple of methodological debates that I took into account about individualism and holism. That is philosophy of social sciences debates. The only thing I would say is that I developed certain moderate positions between these methodological debates as a methodological like moderate individualism. We can talk about this. Again, it's the idea that individuals take into account the rules that are their context, but also they conform those rules. There's a co-evolution of minds and institutions. So in the idea is that what we have as a legal order or a social order is a product of this co-evolution. Then again, the debates about if individuals are rational. There are like homo economicus, like this kind of individuals that calculate benefits all the time. There are a lot of theories in social sciences that assume this kind of individuals. There are, thank you. There are other theories in social sciences that take into account the idea that, on the other hand, individuals are blind rule followers. So where are we? We are blind rule followers, or we are this kind of calculation machines that are all the time thinking about benefits? Well, my position, or the position that we offer, is a moderate evolutionary. You know, that idea that the same person can have certain objects, certain purposes, and they are in a way purpose-driven or self-interest, but at the same time they follow rules in certain conditions, and well, we discuss in which conditions and how. Again, rationality. Are individuals completely rational? No. Well, I introduced there one idea that is very interesting to discuss, if you want, that is the idea of heuristics, that can explain a lot of our behavior, not being only influenced or determined by like formal rules, but by these procedures of by imitation, or by these mental shortcuts that allow us to decide in certain context without having all this calculation, you know. And well, this is the proposal in a way is to think about legal rules and political institutions, and in three levels, you know. There are certain very general abstract rules that can be explained by biological evolution. For example, certain abstract rules that are very common in a whole way of societies, very different societies in the time have, for example, I don't know, incest taboo, or have certain rules that determine that the traitor must be expelled from the society in different ways. Sometimes it's exiled, sometimes it's jailed. But, you know, there are certain rules that can be explained in those terms. Another number of rules, more like the institutional framework, for example, constitutional frameworks, for example, can be understood that they are different from society to society, and can be the outcome of the social learning process. You know, each society and with the process of try and error, try different institutions, some found some certain that are better for them. And again, with imitation or not, with comparison with other institutions. And third, the idea of specific institutions or specific rules that sometimes are the outcome of an individual learning process. How can I don't know, draw like a contract with my tenant in Argentina today? Well, you know, that is a very specific learning process, and you can understand it in game theory terms, you know, like an individual learning process. Again, I try to explain this way, the emergence, stability, and change. You know, one thing that I try to explain with this theory is, you know, in Argentina and in general in legal theory, we have like these two big, perhaps all the lawyers here can remember, we have these two big schools, natural law theories and positivist theories. One explains law as given by a God or a natural order. We have principles of natural law, and the positive principles or positivist rules that we give together have to respect the principles of natural law. The other one, the positivist point of view, says, no, law is artificial. It's a creation given by men. We design it, we create, and we can change it without problem. this position is in the middle of both, you know. At the same time, it is a natural outcome that comes from the interactions of individuals, but it's not given by a superior order. But we cannot change it completely from one day to the other by our decision, because it is the product of a very long-lasting learning process. So, in a way, we have to respect all the learning that are in those institutions. At the same time, we are changing those institutions all the time with our behavior and with our new interactions. So, this is the last one. It's a lot of information, but it's all the points that I took into account for my legal evolutionary theory. But what I was saying before is this last part, that it says, okay, we can think of a legal order as these three levels, the very abstract rules that we can maybe explain by a biological evolutionary explanation. These unarticulated rules, or maybe a little more explicit, they are maybe based on this social evolutionary process, and then there are these positive rules, you know, the codes, the contracts that we have every day. And these, they are like the three-level evolution that we could explain the whole legal order. And just one little thing, what I said before is why it is important for me to be able to share these ideas with all of you, being lawyers or not, is that sometimes in Argentina we have these very strong discussions about reality. We don't like reality in any way, or sometimes we don't agree with certain aspects of our reality. And the first thing a lot of people said, well, let's change law. So let's present a project to change certain positive law, you know. We will change this article of the civil code or the penal code. Okay. And we go supposedly to the Congress and we change the law. But people still behaving as they were before, you know, so why? So we must explain that in a way, you know, because there are certain laws that have, certain positive laws, that have this kind of background given by the change in the social order, you know, that they are in a way driven by the social, like bottom-up, you know, the social movements or the social ideas. But sometimes there are only technical changes that are not very related with what people think or what people are. You know that in Argentina we all the time think, well, we violate law all the time. Okay, that's right, but why? You know, this only because we don't like law, or because we have other rules that are in a way working with us. For example, there are we can discuss this afterwards, but there are certain rules that we cannot respect. Why? Because they are against our own minimal interest, you know. We cannot, we discussed this in Argentina with taxes, for example. Now we know there are a lot of people that don't pay taxes. Why they don't pay taxes? Because if they pay taxes, they cannot go on with their business. Okay, that is legally good? Okay, no, of course, but if we understand the legal order not only as the written law, we can then understand how these rules emerge, why there are respect, why certain change in time, why certain not, one day some they don't exist anymore, and when they are very long-lasting. And one other example is we have in our constitution or even in our civil code certain rules that are very similar to other countries' rules. You know, our constitution is pretty similar to American constitution in certain ways, for example, or we have a lot of examples of that. And why we have so different institutional histories, on how we can explain so different application of that. Well, because law is not only that written rule, you know, it's a group of habits, of principles, of regularities that explain how we interpret that region law, how we apply that region law, how we think that are applicable for us or not. So again, this vision in a way try to open our scope of how we see law and political institutions and give certain tools to explain law and political institutions in a more wider and dynamic way. Well, that's all for me. And sorry.
Okay. Yes, I am on. I know we will have a lot of questions. Before we do, I have to say, I spent my entire career in public policy, and I understand so much more now than I did 10 years ago. So we will start, and I'll ask you, Charlie, to put up on screen our Zoom people so I can see who has questions there. But I will start here in the room, right here.
Thank you very much, very interesting. But I was really surprised that all the theories you presented. Okay, that's come my voice. Sorry, I try not to be the teacher's voice, but I must use it. Okay. I was surprised that all the theories you have presented took the institutions in the same box. Family is an institution, and it's quite different. Natural institution is called quite different from this institution, from schools and all that. And our relation, you were talking about Argentine's relation with rules and laws, and why it's different from other countries. And I'm surprised that family culture isn't considered as the origin of that relation, because it depends on the family culture you have, what is the respect you have to the rules, and after that to the laws. It comes from there, in my opinion, and why you don't take the family as a separate institution.
Okay, well, first of all, here I made a complete synthesis of 300 pages. You know, it's very, very little what I said. I didn't talk about in the book about family, that's right. But when we are discussing here institutions, I particularly discussing political institutions. You know, how we can explain a political framework or a constitution, or why in certain countries we can find certain political institutional principles and not in others, but not all the social institutions. I'm not trying to explain all of them. Why? This evolutionary point of view was applied before for social norms and for moral norms. In fact, my professor at London School of Economics, when I was studying there, has written a book on the structural evolution of morality, for example. So he's a mathematician, and he made a lot of evolutionary game theory models to explain the emergence of moral rules. My book was more devoted to legal rules and political rules in England, not to all the social rules. And my idea was all that big discussion that it was in the UK and the USA about the evolutionary vision of rules to take it to law that is not so common to see. And that's why I don't explain. There are certain theories, for example, evolutionary psychology explains a lot of how certain legal rules or political rules emerge from familiar relations, or how those communities are structured, or how the communities are organized inside. So there is a connection between, for example, familiar organization and other kind of laws. But I devoted mostly to legal rules or political rules. That's why. Yes, Lily.
All right, Eliana. Now, I'm always. I know we don't live in a lawless society. We can't say that, but we tinkle a bit with the law. And I was surprised at street corners when the light goes red that actually cars do stop. And I always wonder, yeah, I must be amazed at that. But I wonder, is it because there's a rule that's been internalized that we believe that this is better, or is it just survival instinct?
Well, that kind of behavior, it is very well explained by evolutionary game theory, for example. We have strategies in our life, even if we are conscious or not. And in Argentina, we generally introduce ourselves in our mind, maybe unconsciously, certain strategies that allows our survival. So, for example, in streets, we generally, in Argentina, if we are a walking person in the streets, we don't just see the light and cross the street. We see for all even if it's red, we see now there are bicycles in each way. You know, we see more. So why? Because we are used to people do not respect, or we are generally the less consider the walking person. But in other communities, generally people think that why? Because I will try to explain it very very fast. But there are certain strategies that, in a repeated game, prove to be successful. So, in Geneva, in Switzerland, probably, if you have the zebra lines and you find them and you cross the street, probably all the cars will stop. So, once you made it once, twice, third time, then you will be peacefully walking around, and when you see a zebra, you will cross. If you're in Argentina and you put your feet there, and people won't stop. So the first time you try, the car say, "Ee!" and you felt that you will be dead in 1 minute. So then you try other strategies. So first you see for all, and then the successful strategy is the one that allow you to survive, and you will check all the corners several times before you cross, you know. And of course, that behavior is adaptive in one community and it's not adaptive in another community. When you come with different habits from another cities, I remember that I lived only 1 year in London, but when I returned to Buenos Aires, I had certain habits that have changed, and I said, okay, I will get robbed in the subway in 1 minute, because I was not used to have my purse with me. I have it here, you know. But it is not because London is perfect. It's just the other circumstances and other rules of behavior that are successful in London and are not successful here. And yeah.
Ileana, I enjoyed your presentation very much. I work in the field of history,
Okay.
and so I'm sure you've heard this before, but the use of the term evolution makes me a little nervous.
Okay.
Because it sounds like the situation where we are now with laws in whichever country, it's inevitable. It's outside of human agency. It implies to me that human action or human agency is less important, and
Okay.
what we have ended up with is a big process that is outside the grasp of
Okay.
anyone. Now, in some ways, that's also evolution. It sounds like it implies don't change anything. Okay. To me, there's an implication there that whatever change might come about, give it time. Don't push it.
Okay.
In some ways, it seems a very conservative kind of
but it's
attitude towards the law. I imagine you've heard
Yes.
critiques like this before.
Yes.
Can you speak to that,
Yes, of
please?
course. There are 3 things I could say about this. The first thing is evolution in this way, it tried to be descriptive nor normative. So it is not saying that evolution is progress. it is not implied in the evolutionary explanations of social institutions that we are all going to a better situation always. It is only that situation or those rules are more adaptive to the circumstances, but not much more than that. The second thing that you said, it is the role of the agent. It depends on what level of evolution you are talking about. If it's in the biological evolution, of course, I agree with you in those explanations, the human agent has much more opinion. They are like more blinded agents. In the social evolution or the social evolutionary explanations, individuals are not completely conscious, are not completely constructive in their behavior, but they are part of the game and they are trying to be better in a way. So what I introduce by heuristics, by bounded rationality, is not that individuals are mere the outcome of an external force. There are individuals that take decisions and behave in certain ways. The only thing that I discuss is that they do it with perfect rationality or perfect computer system to consider benefits. So I'm discussing with rationality theory, but I'm not saying that in the cultural evolutionary process individuals are blind. They are just imitating maybe. They're taking into account heuristics when they cannot calculate the best optimist result for certain options, but they are not completely blind. And in the individual process, the third level, they are completely active. There are individuals that are interacting and they are deciding what or which strategy to adopt and which is more successful, and they change. And why, for me, this is not conservative, or my intention is not to be conservative at all. It is that the idea is not. One thing is to respect the learning of what institutions and rules have in their process, in their evolutionary process. Another thing is not to promote change. The change will be promoted in terms of individuals that change their behavior because they have other demands, because they have other ideas. To say it in a biological way, mutation is part of the game all the time. The idea is that the difference between that and the constructive point of view is that the constructive point of view is say, okay, I don't like that of the society, let's sit, write a new constitution or write a new contract. And from now on, we have to discuss in a very abstract level, because I were in those classes of public policy with very, very the ontological professor saying, what could be the justice principle that every individual could accept in rational terms, being blinded about their circumstances? Oh my God, we will not get there anywhere soon, The idea is that, okay, there are forces of change, there are forces of stabilization, but when the strategies, the rules, institutions we are working with do not work, they are not successful for us, they are not adapted for us, we are starting to try other strategies, other rules.
We have at least 2 more questions here in the room. Do we have any questions from our online attendees? Okay, I just wanted to make sure that I was not ignoring you. Did not want to make that mistake again. Okay, I know of 3 more questions, so we'll start here with Susanna.
Thank you, Amy. First of all, congratulations for a wonderful, wonderful exposition. I was wondering about the attitude of humanity in general when faced to an important crisis. Remember the COVID pandemic. There were new sets of norms, laws, rules created to face a pandemic, and many of these rules were international. They were trial and error rules, most of them. Yes. We didn't know anything about it. And I think it is important to reflect on that now that we are facing, as humanity, we are facing not more important, but other important crises, such as the wars everywhere which risk to be a third world war, and the emergence of artificial intelligence, which is taking over. For example, artificial intelligence defends other artificial intelligences. So it needs a whole new set of laws and norms and rules. I just wanted to reflect about it.
Yes, there's a whole discussion nowadays if we have to write new rules like conscious rules. Delia, we will talk about in next July about artificial intelligence and the impact of it. This is my own very, very self-opinion. I think that in the face of this kind of very new phenomena, I won't agree to give very strong top-down new rules, because we are facing changes all the time. Maybe, yes, certain general abstract rules to behave with each other and to use these instruments, use these new instruments, but I won't recommend this big treaties, like international treaties nowadays at least, to regulate all the work with artificial intelligence, since we don't have even the idea of what it can do or not, or the impact in each realm. But Delia knows much more about this, and we'll discuss this in July.
Hello, thank you very much for your speech. I have a question in terms of how the evolution of institutions from the inside that aren't being driven by they are being driven by cultural influences, but how does that fit with what you're speaking about today? In particular, what came to my mind was, in the United States, the Supreme Court has a formal process for hearing cases and deciding on them. And they also have what's called a shadow docket, in which they do very quick decisions, and the use of the shadow docket has skyrocketed lately. And it is giving responses to written law that are not what is generally perceived by many people in the population in a very fast-track way. How does that fit with what you're talking about?
Well, what is very interesting about it is that there's certain thing that I didn't say, but Elena told me before that I must say about it. That when we talk about institutions, we can talk about this Douglas North, Nobel Prize author, that talk about formal and informal institutions. So when we talk about formal institutions, we talk about laws and procedures and this. But when we talk about informal institutions, Elena said, this club is an informal institution in a way, and the Orquesta de los Barrios is an informal institution. We have certain uses, certain regularities. What we're discussing is very interesting. I'm not an expert on US Supreme Court, of course, but I would say is that if the Supreme Court or any formal institutions start to give certain answers to the society that are not in a way in accordance with the main society or the general society principles or ideas or values, we will probably have a clash there. We will probably have certain tension and certain even social discomfort that could end in different ways. So in Argentina, we are experts in having formal institutions that do not agree with the informal ones. So, and as you can see, we don't live very peacefully, generally. But that is a way to understand why certain formal resolutions could be perfectly acceptable for general public and others do not, and probably that could end in a questioning of those solutions or not, or an adaptation by the public of the solutions. But the idea that what is interesting is that what you're telling is there's a tension there between formal and informal institutions, and that would lead somewhere. I'm not an expert in US politics, so sorry, but I don't. Yes.
Okay, and our last question, I know there are others in the room, but we are out of time. So our last question.
Okay, I want to say that I'm comfortable with the word evolution. As far as evolution means change through time. And I think we're living at a time right now where we're seeing some very speedy devolution or deconstruction of laws, particularly since the advent of the President of the United States, whose name I will not mention, but everyone knows, and how that has, in a sense, reordered or disordered the world order as we knew it, most particularly in the United States, where the Constitution is an afterthought for the folks that are in power right now. And we see these decrees that are happening very quickly. So, to be quick, huge question, but what are some of the basic factors that end us in this sense of falling apart? How does the evolution end up falling apart?
Please don't ask me to explain Trump, please. Because I don't know much. So the only thing I could say is that probably this moment of the world cannot only be explained by our formal international order. You know, the international treaties do not apply for most of the things that we're living today. Not only in terms of how the states are acting, not only the US, China, Russia, and we have the private and the public spheres completely intermixed. Just as an example, I remember a talk some years ago of a friend of mine that works in the Criminal International Court. That he was living in the Central African Republic, and the police in Central African Republic was the Russia private and business Wagner. So that's very difficult to explain. But the only thing that I could say is the old rules, all the rules that we created after the Second World War, are not much applicable nowadays not only because of Trump or his decisions, but of the whole war interaction between states, between private business, and yes, and again, next talk, Mariano Tursi will talk about international relations and the war situation today, so that will be...
Thank you so much. Like I said, I did this as a career, and I learned so much today. So thank you. We have a small gift. This is art by one of our members. Here, let me take that. Miwa Takahira. Please tell me I pronounced that correctly. She is currently in Uruguay, and as always, one of our very talented members. I wrapped that. I'm so sorry.
I would like to open it.
My mother used to ask if I owned stock in a tape company because I always over-tape all of the gifts.
Oh, very nice. That's okay.
So, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody on Zoom. And we will I hope to see everybody at our next luncheon. Apparently the conversation continues.
We'll follow.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you, Charlie. It's so difficult. Yeah, created a lot of treaties, humanitarian law, that is the law for war,